And it's always best to wrap up Mobile World Congress at the very end of the show with analysts that were front and center with the carriers and suppliers that we all want to hear from. Here to wrap up Mobile World Congress 2016 rather, is Derek Curtin. He's principal analyst of the Curtin Group and chairman of the Telecom Council of Silicon Valley. Also, we have Wally Swain, senior vice president at 451 Research. I hope I pronounced that right, by the way. John Jacobs, vice president of member and industry affairs at TIA. And on the end of the panel is Andy Castengay, principal analyst at Makina Research. And gentlemen, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Thanks for wrapping up this Mobile World Congress 2016. I said 2013. Andy, I want to start with you. Just sort of high-level, broad brush question. We all talk about NFE, IoT, 5G, virtual reality. We're also seeing that here at the show. But what have you seen that we haven't really talked about so far?
Well, I think from my perspective, our entire focus is on IoT and M2M. So while we always anticipate that everybody loves what we do and our focus, the actual surprise is just how pervasive IoT has become throughout this entire show. Not only in terms of nifty new items and technologies, but really companies trying to figure out how to engage with IoT from a strategic standpoint. And I see this at every single hall. That has been a huge transformation over the last 3 to 4 years. 4 years ago, IoT wasn't even a term, really, I mean, in any consistent way. And now it's a pervasive, consistent part of the show. That is fantastic news as far as I'm concerned, because that's what we love and enjoy. But I think it's also pretty exciting, because to me, it means that there's going to be a lot of creativity in the next couple of years.
Anything surprise you, John?
Well, I think one is the coalescence of the 4 topics you referenced in this show. I think historically it was more diffused focuses and areas of interest, but I think what I've observed is a lot more focus on those 4 areas. And also when it comes to IoT, I found it interesting to see sort of a focus on use cases to a greater extent than historically, which would signal to me where it's more of a faster market adoption or more prescient market adoption coming down. So that was interesting.
Wally?
Yeah, I would go with a software-related theme. I spent a lot of time with vendors talking about what's called customer experience management, and they've had wonderful software and no clients because the operators still hadn't got the message yet. This year, finally, people saying, "I want to buy that, I want to do that. It's important for me."
Derek?
I'm going to go with something that used to be very big at the show. If you look back at 2010, 2011, it was handsets. And for me at least, they kind of fell off my radar when it came to the show. I found them more and more being homogeneous bricks and less interesting to me. But this year I think handsets were cool again. We saw the Samsung Galaxy S7 was a really fantastic handset. It's going head to head with the LG G5. But what I found particularly surprising and interesting about it wasn't just the handset. It was a handset plus accessories and an accessory ecosystem. So if in the Samsung case, it's going to be the Galaxy S7, but if you buy it early, you're going to get the Gear VR virtual reality experience headset thrown in for free with a pre-order of the phone, and then you also see them coming out with a 3D camera that does a VR type of 360 interface. So they're putting all that out together, so it's no longer just, you can't wow us with just a great phone with the latest processor. You got to throw the whole bucket of experiences, and this year, as you mentioned at the top, it's partly VR.
Andy, of course, 1 billion new subscribers connected to the network by 2020. Of course, that subscriber growth will eventually diminish. What new revenue streams are carriers and even suppliers looking at?
Within the context of new revenues, once you start getting beyond human beings, essentially, you're really moving into the sensors, machines, devices realm. And that creates new revenue opportunities, but also creates new challenges. Primarily because the old paradigm of connectivity equaling revenue is quickly going away. In fact, if you look at M2M connectivity ARPU, in many instances, just 3 or 4 years ago, we were talking $2 to $3 a month per device. Now we're talking about 50 cents, 25 cents, and going even lower. So what that signals to me is that there's revenue opportunity, but not in the old business model. So what's happening now is you're starting to see operators in particular start to realize, I can't be connectivity only. I have to figure out how to participate more actively in the services side of the business, and that requires some pretty deep thinking on how each market associates with that brand. Is it a trusted brand? Will enterprises want to work with you? Or if that's the case, that's great. If it's not, how do you attract that interest, maybe you have to go through acquisition, partnerships. That's where we're at currently, and that's still a difficult road to determine for a lot of carriers, but I think it's going to be exciting to watch over the next few years as we start to see some really break ground.
I'm seeing a lot of stuff, kind of picking up where Andy is. You talk about the next billion people, and then it kind of slows down and tapers off. I don't know, I'm hearing a lot of talk about how if you address the base of the pyramid, there's a whole lot of opportunity, a whole lot of other people there. But building off Andy's point, they're not going to be paying the same ARPUs we're used to in the Western world in this context of $30, $60, maybe down to $30 a month average ARPU these days. We're going to be looking at making money on people who are spending $10, $8, $6 per month ARPUs, and the industry has to be better at finding ways to first access those people and give them a solution that is suitable for them. And I think a lot of organizations, GSMA is working on that, cheaper and cheaper phones and stuff. But also, to Andy's point, just like the Internet of Things, we got to be able to make money on much lower revenue per device.
Yeah. Right.
And I'm going to follow up on Derek's comment and say my focus mostly is emerging markets. And so that's where I live.
Right.
And these ARPUs under $10 is where that's where most of my attention is focused. And it's just a wonderful opportunity of connecting people and giving them broadband technologies when they certainly didn't have any connectivity, didn't have voice connectivity.
Yep.
And now we're going to give them broadband, and that's the big leap.
Yeah, I got a question for you then, Wally. Is if we do that, is the hope then that these people, we might maybe be able to elevate their standard of living to the point where there's more money we can earn from them by providing them additional services?
Well, I mean, there is a study, it's perhaps of dubious economics, but there is a study that correlates broadband penetration, doesn't matter whether it's mobile or fixed, directly to growth in GDP per capita. And that's a message that governments have bought all over the world, and it's a message that operators in emerging markets are really counting on. And we think it's possible. I mean, we just think it's part of the transformation from resource economies to manufacturing economies to service economies, and you certainly can't make that last leap unless you have enough digital infrastructure to justify to make it happen, basically.
I was just going to add another revenue source that some of the carriers are sort of beginning to allude to is through virtualization and through new ecosystems where they are looking at partnerships that drive incremental revenue. So whether it's through channels or through new services, that's obviously the virtualization phase is new in itself, but I know that there's a lot of focus on the incremental revenue piece associated with that.
John, we're living in a climate right now, as you know, of consolidation in our industry, mergers and acquisitions. Even Alcatel-Lucent and Nokia is now one brand, Nokia. How is this going to change the landscape of the industry over the next 5 years?
Well, it will have a significant impact. I think there's positive and negatives to this. I mean, obviously the front end of that is the ability to bring together technologies and the resources and the talents, but to make them purposeful on the OEM side, the manufacturing side. But there's a big priority on the virtualization of the networks. So the ability of traditional OEMs, like some of the ones you mentioned, to then create new ecosystems, to create new partnerships, and then to derive new value, new services in those relationships is a tall order. However, economics are economics. These organizations merge, they bought each other out for economic purposes. There's the positive side that when they steer their way through to new technologies and new services, it'll be better for the consumer and for the enterprise. But it's a bit of a road to walk.
Yeah, I think there's always been, well, at least Cisco's been at this now for 30 years or something, and the other tier one vendors have discovered it in the last 10 or 15 years that there's lots of stuff you can't do yourself, and so we're going to see constant absorption, if you will, of smaller companies where the innovation takes place and they get absorbed into these larger companies. We may not see another ALU Nokia for 5 to 10 years or something like that, but we'll certainly see lots of smaller acquisitions, because that's really the way that innovation takes place, and it takes place for the carriers and it takes place for the vendors especially.
I see a thing like a Nokia Siemens and then an Alcatel-Lucent, these kind of mergers that have taken place have very much been a response to low-cost competition coming from Asia, and particularly China. And I think that's been a driver for a lot of them, and we need to be bigger so we can have better economies of scale. And that is looking backwards. I think looking forwards is a really interesting thing that's going to happen as well, which is going to be a challenge for these companies now, even as merged entities, and that's going to be things like NFV and SDN kind of disrupting the way the network is built and opening up a path for new entrants to kind of attack them as well from the sides. And we talked about the innovators, and we're here in the Dell booth. Dell's always had a role in telecommunications, but their role now has potential to shift and grow, as does Hewlett-Packard and a variety of other companies.
Wally, I wanted to ask you about Narrowband IoT and why carriers are talking about that more than ever. Of course, 50 to 70 billion expected connected devices over the next 5 years even. Why is Narrowband IoT, and you can all jump in on this by the way, why is that being talked about now more than even last year?
Well, I'm sure hoping Andy's going to jump in because this is...
I don't think we'll be able to hold him back.
No, I think, but I'll give him a sec. The carriers are definitely looking for things to do, and I don't mean that in a negative sense. I mean they're looking for opportunities, and there's the thing about narrowband IoT is that it changes the architectural equation that we have right now for machine to machine. And Andy can explain that a whole lot better, so I'm going to lob it over to him.
So the interesting thing is, and I think Wally's point is really important, idle hands, of course, are the devil's workshop. And the point here being that up until now, operators from a technological standpoint had a very minimal amount of things that they could offer M2M and IoT companies and startups, simply because the wireless network offered mobility and it offered certain advantages, but cost and battery power and building penetration, all of these things really weren't part of the package. The new generation of LTE modules, whether it's LTE-M or NB-IoT, changes that in a dramatic way. So all of a sudden, operators are relevant in building coverage, the sensors, low cost. All of a sudden you're talking about very, very low cost modules that can last on 2 AA batteries with certain configurations for up to 10 years. And that radically transforms how they can be part of this broader
To draw a visual of what you guys are talking about, if we jump back 10 years, we talked about machine-to-machine communications. It was almost as ugly a concept as taking a StarTAC and taping it to some kind of a sensor and saying, hey, mission accomplished. But it has a $60 a month bill going to one of the wireless carriers. Right. Whereas with these new narrowband IoT spectrum and technologies, we have the ability for carriers to adopt them and have a custom-built solution for these very low bandwidth, very low kilobits per month devices, which no industry in the right mind would tap a cell phone and pay that kind of a contract. We need new models, new architectures, and specifically new billing models that are suitable for these customers.
What's interesting is not only is it allowing them to enter into new things, but it's also, at this show in particular, there's new conversations around how much these new technologies will even start to cannibalize short-range technologies like Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. Not because they're necessarily any better in certain contexts, but what you end up with is the cost of provisioning and putting a network of Wi-Fi and Bluetooth in a building. There's cost there. Now, while they don't have ongoing monthly costs, these new modules will allow for much faster, more reliable setup that is starting to compete in areas where simply it didn't happen before.
Yeah. Just Andy mentioned it at the beginning, Derek just alluded to it. The best line I heard at the show was a senior guy in IoT software development, and he called the operator opportunity the digital pennies of this generation. If you remember the comment about digital content from 15 or 20 years ago. The new digital penny opportunity is IoT, and just like the problem for the content providers 15 years ago, the operators have to reinvent themselves or find some other way because digital pennies are not going to make it.
Yep. And if there are digital pennies, frankly, we got to find a way to pick them up as an industry, and a way to pick them up with some kind of a margin. We don't want to pick up a penny with a $10 cost, right? You want to pick up that penny with a 0.5 cent cost so that you're actually making some margin on it. And I think that's kind of what these IoT technologies are gunning to do, lower the cost of operating that.
Okay, we'll extend that. We'll call it, don't roll a truck for a digital penny.
Yeah. That's right, and it's going to force operators to be able to analyze their costs and margins to a level that has not been seen before. Yeah. If you go in and you say, hey, are you profitable at $1 a month? They might say yes, but if you ask them to get into details, it'll start to get really hazy and they'll do a little misdirection, right? So this is going to force them to understand their underlying costs and the technologies involved, not only as a provisioning, but also ongoing care. And that total cost of ownership is going to flip things on its head.
Carriers need to look back too. I mean, they're aggressively going after this, which is important because hopefully they learn a lot of lessons from the tablet space. When we saw tablets coming out here starting in 2010, 2011, replacing phones as the hot topic of the Europe Mobile World Congress in those days, and the lessons there were that if you put an embedded cellular radio in the tablet and try to sell it as if it were a cell phone, your attach rates, meaning the amount of subscribers that will pay for that connection, are about zero. A lot of customers took that subsidized tablet and shut off the cellular connection as soon as they could, flipped over to Wi-Fi, because Wi-Fi in their experience was free, and the phone was or the tablet rather, was cost them up to $60 a month. The carriers learned, and they adopted these family of devices plans where now, okay, for $10 incremental you can connect your tablet. But they made a price that matched the customer's willingness to pay on those services. Now you see the attach rates starting to climb back up. In fact, you can see the proportion of tablets that have cellular connectivity actually attach, having dropped originally and then increasing now again, as people are saying, okay, at $10 I can do this.
Right. And the other interesting thing here is that IoT starts to open up new categories of service that aggressive operators can participate in. AT&T is a great example of this, where 2 years ago they decided security in the home is a wonderful market, totally fragmented, with some serious investment, they can play a part. So now Digital Life is competing with the likes of ADT, the cable companies, for security, and that means that broader revenue pie for an individual actually starts to increase much beyond the typical telecommunications piece. And that's all around services, because once again the connectivity is not much, but that services and devices installation, that's some pretty interesting business.
Best thing for the phone companies about that is they're the disruptor. So you got the ADTs and the other companies around the world that have been doing this for $30 a month ARPUs, revenue streams, and the carriers can come in, tack that onto a phone bill and bundle it up for half that cost. So the customer actually can look at a carrier for one and says, wow, they're way cheaper than the other guy. And that's a great opportunity. It builds loyalty, makes it harder to churn away. While you started by talking about customer experience, but the goal of that is loyalty. Loyalty is hugely important too. As you get to capping off the number of customers that are available for you, you start to really want to retain the ones you have. So customer experience matters, bundling other service together, and it increases the stickiness you have with customers.
Well, as if I were to turn the IoT to other than carrier solutions for a sec, because a lot of the IoT solutions are in adjacent markets, connected vehicles, industrial automation, and energy, smart grid, and I'm not sure, although this is a very carrier-heavy show by definition, I'm not sure if all the IoT solutions we're seeing here are applicable to the carrier, nor should they be. No. And I think it would be great to see this show focus increasingly on those adjacent markets. Mm-hmm. You see a little bit of that in some of the booths in the demo areas, but you don't see the presence of those, Rockwell Automation or Johnson Controls here.
Right.
And
that's true.
It's just an interesting thing about IoT in particular.
I'm sorry.
I was just going to say that it is an operator-oriented show because they're the customers. How many booths from operators are there? Maybe 4 or 5. There's a small number of European operators that have booths. This is all the bread and butter of this show is vendors talking to clients, and so it's not much of a leap to say that it's going to be Johnson Controls, it's going to be Caterpillar, it's going to be Bank of America that are going to be wandering these, and they are wandering these halls today. They just don't have signs on their heads saying Caterpillar, and you can see that happen. They're not going to have booths, but they're going to be here.
Right.
John, a lot of hype at the event this year, talking about edge computing and fog computing to support all these billions of devices. Then there was the other side of the coin. Actually, it was just one person who said that they thought that hype wasn't really justified, that the core network needs to be robust, and when that happens, the hype will diminish around fog computing and edge computing. Would you agree with that?
Well, I think actually Wally had a really great point about this pendulum swing we chatted earlier. Yeah. And I think not just in technology, but you see that in a lot of economic forces. There is that pendulum swing. I thought your point, and I think I would encourage you to talk about it on the cost side.
It's always had to do with the cost of processing versus the cost of communications. And when the cost of processing is high, it goes to the center. We now call it the cloud. We used to call it time sharing. We had all kinds of words for it when I was younger. And when the cost of processing drops relative to the cost of communication, then it migrates to the edge. And as a consequence, it's not so much that, even now, it's not so much that the pendulum's swinging back and forth and it all goes one way or the other. What's happening is that there are applications where if the cost of computing is pretty much a commodity, it's going to go to the edge. If the cost of computing is something which is very sophisticated and needs to happen someplace in a supercomputer or in a grand complex of computers, it's going to go to the core. And so it's a oversimplification to say edge, core. No, we got both going on at the same time, and we are all seeing applications that are moving rapidly to the edge, and we're all seeing applications that are moving rapidly to the core.
And I would observe that it's, we talk about the pendulum swinging back and forth. I think Wally's very well expressed. It depends on the costs and the demands of the situation. But I would call it a ratchet, because what happens is we build at the edge because there are things that need to be built at the edge, and then with cost change and needs change, we say, oh, we need to go back and we swing over and we focus on the core. But we never tear down what we built at the edge, and we never tear down what we built at the core. We leave those in place. We just shift focus back and forth and build up on both sides. And Andy was telling me before that you said it's really application specific.
Yeah, you have a lot of interesting scenarios, whether it's vehicles communicating between themselves or with infrastructure. Well, at the moment, it's very, very difficult for the wide area network to respond with the speed and the latency requirements that are necessary to make sure that that's a safe, immediate reaction. So that's a scenario where you really don't want to send a lot of signals over the wide area network and hope that it comes back in time before the guy's only a foot in front of you. In a medical scenario, there are a lot of decisions that can be made at a device level, because in a cardiac situation there are just not that many variables. So all that can be processed in that location, and that's actually really beneficial to the patient. So as you go from scenario to scenario, the demands change, but also the technologies can adjust, and this is one of the exciting things actually about this show is I think more so, I've been an analyst for way more years than I want to admit, but the point is, up until recently, technology was often the barrier. We are now at a precipice here where, with the new technologies being developed here and over the next few years, technology is actually not going to hold things back. It's business models, business culture, adjustment of expectations. That's where things are going to start to bottleneck, and that's exciting in a way.
If I can roll that up, because I think you talked right at the top about how 5G was one of the dominant themes at the show, and we all agree with that, so we're not going to debate it. But in what way? What is 5G? I'm going to build it off what you said, is that if you look at 3G, what was 3G? Well, I could define it in three different ways. One was WCDMA, one was TDCMA, but these were all technologies, right, that were 3G. Same with 4G. It is LTE technology, lower latency, better bandwidth, better throughput, et cetera. What is 5G? It's not a technology. 5G is all about doing more interesting things with the technologies we have. It's about taking the technologies to lower latencies. It's about building more heterogeneous networks. It's about building networks that can do multimodal transmissions, multimodal communications, multiple bandwidth and multiple frequencies, whether it's by TDD, time division duplexing, or frequency division duplexing. It's this whole mixed bag, which is causing some people to go, oh, I don't even get what it is. Is it just vaporware? No, it really is everything but the kitchen sink, but it's an effort to do what you're talking about, Andy. Let's take these things, the technologies we have, and make them very practical. What are the needs of the people out there, the network operators out there, and the users that are using their networks, and how do we make 5G solve those needs for IoT, for consumers, individuals?
Well, to Andy's point, 5G is really not about, I'm going to say this backwards.
Yeah.
It's not about doing something, not doing this. It's about taking away things.
Yeah.
It's taking away battery life. It's 10 years. It's taking away latency issues. It's whatever, I can't remember what the number is, but milliseconds, right?
Yep.
And as a consequence, it's about doing exactly what Andy says. Take away the technological barriers.
Yep.
There will not, I'll make a big statement, I'll say there will not be a 6G, because the idea of 5G is not a new air interface, as you said. It's take this away. And then it becomes, as Andy says, it becomes issues about how you organize, who delivers this, what's the business model, are the carriers involved, how is it happening, is it on the edge, is it on the core, all these things we've been talking about. That's the promise of 5G, take it away.
Take away the stuff. The downside is it becomes very nebulous and hard to pin down, so you'll see a lot of booths that are rightly or wrongly saying we are 5G. And it's hard to determine whether that's true or false at any given, but it could very well be that the solutions that they're proposing are part of the solutions that will become part of the 5G standard.
Well, that was you were saying, somebody was saying it's like competing 5G launch dates. And I'm 2016, I'm 2018, I'm 2017, I'm 2016. The regulator in Chile came out this morning and said, we forbid the carriers in Chile to talk about LTE as 4.5G. Now, frankly, I'm perfectly happy to have them talk about 4.5G, because in Chile they would probably call it 5. And that's from the history.
I don't think we Americans are innocent on that claim either. I think we pulled the plug on 4G a little bit, lit the fuse on that one a little too early.
The telecommunications industry does itself no favors by throwing these terms around without any basis, and there's an issue there because it sets up false expectations to both enterprise and consumer clients in such a way that it's very, very hard. It's hard enough to compare the offerings of one operator against another these days because they're so convoluted in many instances. Now, if we're talking about 5G or 4.5G, I mean, no one understands these terms. Even within the industry, it's a lot of confusion.
Well, you know, when ITU comes out rather early in the process and says, this is what 5G is, at least from a speeds perspective, and of course, it doesn't actually exist yet. So I don't know if that's a goal or
John,
a challenge.
You guys do some standard work and stuff.
Yes.
I think it's an interesting question because 5G is nebulous. It's hard to nail down even here where we all think we know what we're talking about. So, but at some point we turn around and we market the technology to the consumer.
Right.
And so, what do you think of the difference between how do we, if we haven't come to terms with what it is among ourselves, how are we going to explain this to the consumer?
Right. I mean, I've heard definitions. It's pure offload micro network is 5G. I've heard it's it's the multi-band approach. It's all of that and then some.
Right.
It's interesting. Then what are the services you're going to lay on top?
My guess is we're not going to sell 5G to consumers.
Yeah,
we're selling it to ourselves. So, an operator is going to buy 5G. What we're going to, I hope we're smart enough to figure out that with all these things we've been talking about, what we're going to do is sell the application to the consumer. We're going to sell you a connected car. We're going to sell you a hyper-connected sensor network. We're going to sell you the things that 5G does.
Right.
Not necessarily, we're not going to sell 5G because frankly the least important use case of 5G is better internet browsing on your cell phone. It's there, but it's not the main part of the standard. The main part of the standard, frankly, is more of the stuff that Andy works with. It's more about IoT and industrial processing and that kind of stuff. So my guess is, we will because we are who we are, but we probably will. It's not something that it's going to be even harder to explain 5G because you don't have an application. As Swamwag said, the problem with 3G was that people didn't know they needed data on their phone.
Right.
Okay. Right. And so we got to so we had to sell them data first before we could talk to them about 3G. Yeah. We got to 4G. Everybody knew what they wanted data, so we could sell them higher, faster, stronger. We're at 5G. Higher, faster, stronger is only going to work if I can talk about the specific application that I'm going to use for it, and I'm not going to be able to say 5G, higher, faster, stronger. Because it doesn't. It's not going to ring to consumers the same way as it did when we had 4G.
And in a sense, a lot of the things in an IoT context don't require higher, faster, stronger. They in fact require lower, slower, and weaker. Cheaper is the keep going. So that's the beauty of what I envision for 5G future is that it allows a multiplicity of business approaches that is truly unique, and that's I think kind of the cool thing going forward is it allows the operators to really think beyond just being the fastest and the most technologically advanced in the traditional sense, but it actually allows them to address so many more business cases effectively. That for me is exciting.
Yeah.
I'm glad we focused on 5G the most. It was clearly the dominant topic here at Mobile World Congress 2016. I had a number of questions to ask you guys, but you just answered them all. So, TIA pays me anyway. So.
Because we could just publish this.
Yeah, that's right. Well,
I appreciate all
these.
It
was a good choice of panel members. You just have to wind us up a little bit.
Absolutely.
Thanks for the coffee. That's all it took.
It was good.
Well, good. Yeah, we'll bring the barista next year.
We probably shouldn't have given Andy 5 cups, but that's
What's he like not on 5 cups?
Yeah, that's an unpleasant experience.
All right, so I'm getting the signal here to wrap it up. So again, I appreciate your time. I know it's winding down to the 11th hour of the event. We're all tired. Andy, thanks for your time and being here.
Thank you very much.
John, thanks for everything you did to support the TI Now booth that we're sitting in, or TI Now stage that we're sitting on right now. Wally, it was good to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
All right, Derek.
Thanks a lot, Abe.
Yeah, thanks. It was fun.
Yeah.
All right, thanks again.